Committee on Human Sexuality. This committee is a group of students, staff, and faculty members who have gotten together to try and develop a university-wide program on human sexuality. Among the goals are developing a sex education curriculum for this university, having resources available, such as speakers and printed materials for anybody that requests it, and presenting programs such as this evening's. We're running short of people because of graduation and other things, and anybody who'd like to join us for next year, if you'd call the Dean of Students office, we'd be happy to talk to you, and have you join us. We'd like to thank the University Lectures Committee, the Dean of Students office, the student government, and the Residence Department who financially sponsored tonight's program. I'd like to give you an outline of what's going to happen this whole weekend. For tonight's program, we're going to start off by having our two speakers who you came to hear speak for approximately 30 minutes apiece. After that, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and there'll be people going around with cards, and we're going to ask for your questions. Because of logistics, it's going to be pretty hard to take questions from the floor. And after the 5-minute break, we'll have a 45-minute discussion, a dialogue, hopefully, between the two panelists. After that, for those who wish to stay, we're going to break down into small discussion groups, which will be led by university personnel, and the two guest speakers will be going around from group to group, so you can have a personal dialogue with them. As part of the program, for those interested, as long as space is available, tomorrow we are sponsoring 5 10-hour encounter groups on human sexuality. Each group will be led by a male and female trained leader. Groups will be limited to 10 to a group, and during the break, after both speakers and before the question periods, you will be able to sign up in the foyer to the right. So if anybody's free. We have to tell you this is a 10-hour commitment. It starts at 8:45 tomorrow morning and goes till about 7. So if you decide to sign up for a group, you are making the whole 10-hour commitment. Our first speaker tonight is Dr. Carlford Broderick. Dr. Broderick is a professor of family relations at Pennsylvania State University. Next year, he's accepted a position as the head of the marriage counseling program and professor of sociology at University of Southern California. He's the editor of the Journal of Marriage and the Family. He's the chairman of the family section of the American Sociological Association. He's the author of, among many journal articles, 2 books, The Individual, Sex, and Society, and Sexual Development in Childhood and Youth, which has already been translated in 4 languages, and he's going to try to have it translated in English sometime soon, too. Dr. Broderick.
You're very courteous. The way this program is structured, I feel that we ought to say, all right, now let's cheer for heterosexuality. Then we could cheer for homosexuality, and we could do locomotive cheers and different things I've been thinking of, but I gather that's not too enthusiastically received as an idea. I do want to talk about heterosexual development as a process. I spent 15 years of my own career studying how it is people get to be heterosexual. Now, I know that we were talking in the car coming in from the airport today, the other speaker and myself, that people take it for granted. They think homosexuality calls for an explanation, but that heterosexuality can be taken for granted. My own career is dedicated to the proposition that that's not true, that you have to explain the development of heterosexuality, that people have an infinite capacity for sexuality of every kind, and that our society manages the rather remarkable, rather remarkable feat of getting 95% of us married sooner or later. That's by the age of 40. 95% of the population claim that they have been married at least once. And I can't think of anything else, except maybe watching television, that you can get 95% of the people to do. So that calls for some kind of an explanation, since we don't have any way of getting people married like they do in India, where the parents arrange it. It's everybody to every man to himself and woman, and it calls for an explanation, probably many explanations. My own experience has, I don't have time in our half an hour together to outline the various paths, but what I want to do is outline to you what seems to be the cultural sequence by which we achieve this truly remarkable feat of getting so many people married, which is, as we've discovered, the quintessence. Marriage is the quintessence of heterosexuality. In fact, the beginning of heterosexuality, I suppose after one's identity as one sex or the other and is identifying those other people who are the other sex out there, seems to be a child's attitude toward marriage. That is, we found that the most powerful predictor of heterosexual fantasies, having a girlfriend, enjoying romantic movies, and so on, the most powerful predictor is a decision that someday you're going to get married. And children make this decision, many of them very young. For example, the majority of 5-year-old girls are already sure they want to get married someday. Now, not a majority of boys are sure at 5. To get a majority of boys, you have to get to about 10 or 12 years of age. By that age, 95% of the girls are sure they want to get married someday, the same number that get married. Well, it varies a little from group to group. Blacks are a little less enthusiastic about marriage than whites, middle class more so than lower class and so on. But the range is not very large. And by the time boys get out of high school, about 75 to 79% of them want to get married someday. But you notice 95% of them get married. So you can see which of the two sexes has their way on that issue. Now, once you've decided that you're going to get married someday, it puts the other sex in a whole special category. A couple of years ago, when unisex was big, people used to say, Dr. Broderick, aren't you worried about what's going to happen when you can't tell the boys from the girls? And I've always replied, it seems to me very sensibly, as long as it's important to be able to tell a boy from a girl, there'll be a way. And I really believe that that's so. As long as that's a socially significant difference, there'll always be cues that are adequate to the occasion. And we find that from a very young age, once a kid has decided he's going to be married someday, the next thing he does is starts looking at the opposite sex as a different kind of category. His friendship relations with them have a different emotional quality. He starts fantasizing romantically rather than merely socially. I remember myself having a girlfriend in the first grade that I shared with my best boyfriend because we didn't do anything with her. We just talked about her. One time we got into a fight with some other boys who did not think that she was the most wonderful girl in the world. And I do remember occasionally following her home from school, ducking behind trees and porches and so on. She always ignored us. She was a lady even then. She walked right on home. And then when she got home, we would go home. And that was all there was to it. In the third grade, I remember I advanced to a fantasy that involved rescuing the girl that I had a case on from bad guys. And as I remember it, I came in on this white horse, see, and without even slowing up or let alone being unseated, I would swoop down and sweep her up onto the horse in front of me, and off we would go into the sunset, where I had not the least idea in the world what to do with the girl when she got into the sunset. But I knew that's what you did with girls. You rode them off into the sunset. And the wonderful thing about such fantasies is you write the script yourself. You know, nothing bad ever happened. I never got shot by the bad guys. They shot at me, but they were terrible shots. They never got me. And more importantly, the girl never said, put me down, you know, those are my friends, or I'm afraid of horses, or I never fell off, or anything bad ever happened. I always masterfully rode off, you know, and she looked worshipfully up at me because I was writing the script, and why shouldn't it work out that way if I'm writing the script, right? Now, we don't give up these kind of fantasies all our lives. You know, what's James Bond about, after all, if it's not the same fantasy, only with more episodes? But they play a particularly valuable role in the technical thing we call it is anticipatory socialization. That is, people rehearse a situation before they're actually in it. my teenage daughter, when she was about 13, used to stand in front of the mirror a lot, you know, checking herself out, make sure she was all there, and saying sophisticated things to herself in the mirror. And then she wouldn't like the way that sounded, so she'd try it again with a little laugh in the middle, you know. And I'd say, honey, you know, what makes you think that the guy is going to give you a straight line so that you can say the sophisticated thing you've been rehearsing all evening? And she would just look darkly at me. And I gathered that somehow she'd work it into the conversation during the evening, you know, as though it were freshly thought, actually much rehearsed. Then we rehearse all of these things. We rehearse emotions. We rehearse being in love. How would you interpret this fact? We found that fifth graders, if you ask how many of them have ever been in love, about 50% of them say, I have been in love. Okay, you say, well, when were you first in love? They say, just this year for the first time. Okay, now you ask seventh graders, how many of you have ever been in love? Half of them have been in love. Well, when did you fall in love? When you were in the fifth grade? No, just this year. So we asked 12th graders and all the grades in between and got the same answer. About half of them had ever been in love, and it was always just this year for the first time. Now, you stop and think about that. Either something happened the year before we did our study that half the people in the world fell in love, or else every year is only counted as practice for next year. You know, you ask a seventh grader, well, what about that stuff in the fifth grade? He says, you can't call that love. That was just a puppy love. What did I know about love in the fifth grade? Now that I'm in the seventh grade, now I understand about this. I used to have a roommate that did that every 6 weeks. He would come into the room and take down his girl's picture and put it down in a drawer and put up another picture, and I would say, but what happened to Joan? He says, Joan, what about Joan? I said, but you said you loved Joan. He said, what did I know about Joan before I met Marianne? You know, Marianne is love. She taught me what love really is. So I always give my definition of love to my classes that they have to take down and give back to me on the exam. Love is whatever current relationship you're emotionally involved in. And I think that's a definition that will stand the test of any amount of empirical research. Now, women, I think, even more than men, tend to rehearse their emotions in fantasy before they do in life. Because I think women are more afraid of making fools of themselves in this, perhaps with cause, in this area. And I was talking one time to just to demonstrate how I never understood when I was a kid why girls, especially, and women, you know, the Tom Jones phenomenon, the shrieking and screaming and, you know, fainting from orgasm over these artists, these pop artists and so on. When, you know, it traces clear back at least to the Chic and, you know, Frank Sinatra and all the way up through the Beatles and so on. And boys don't behave like that. I mean, they stamp and whistle and hoot, but they don't pass out, for heaven's sakes. And I never really understood this until one day I was on a plane with the leader of one of these pop bands. It's several years ago, and it's out. The group's out now. But at the time, they had 4 gold records. It was Sonny and the Outsiders, and this was Sonny. And after he quit trying to convert me to Rosicrucianism, he explained to me about girls and how they did a show, one-night stands in high schools, you know. And they discovered accidentally that the sweat rags they used, because working under the lights, you know, they moved a lot, and they would get to sweating a lot. They didn't want to short out these expensive steel guitars that they had, and so they would use a sweat rag. And they discovered that these had great erotic significance to the girls, who would come up afterwards and say, can I have your sweat rag? You know, I'll take it, I'll never wash it, I'll put it under my pillow and sleep on it, you know. And, and so they worked it into their act. And their last number would be a very provocative, you know, come on up and get it, honey, I'm going to give it to you good. And then they would tease the girls with these rags, you see. And on a, on a good night, they'd have the girls up in the audience, you know, down in the aisles, pushing to get up against the local gendarme who were sacrificing life and limb, pushing these shrieking, screaming, reaching females back, you know. And as a final climax, the guys would throw out these rags, and the girls would scream and shriek and shred little pieces of it off and take it home, you know, and sleep on. Well, one night in Akron, Ohio, he said, at the very crucial moment, the moment of greatest frenzy, the local gendarme thought of their wives and families and decided this was not for them, and they let the girls come piling up on the stage. Well, these guys were just scared to death. I mean, they repented of their sins. You know, their whole life went before them, and they just had visions of themselves being torn earlobe from toenail and pressed in, do you know what happened when those screaming girls got up on the stage with the real, live, quivering boys? Not one damn thing happened. Those girls hadn't counted. They'd counted on the police keeping them back, too. You know, they didn't expect to get up on the stage with a real boy. You know what to do with a real boy? Nothing. That's what you go home. They went right back down off the stage again. Because it was all in their head, you know. It's very well to have orgasms over a guy who's clear up and on the stage, but a real life, he might take advantage of you. Heaven knows what might happen, you know. He might even reject you. That'd be worse. And as long as you're writing the script, everything works out fine, but you never can tell about a real boy. He might have his own lines. Well, so we rehearse so that we'll do it right when the time comes. I had a special problem when I was a kid that I'm sure none of you have had. Some of you may have noticed that I have a large nose. Well, that's a little bit of a handicap if it's combined with a very poor sense of depth perception. You can laugh if you want to, you pug-nosed types, but I used to sit looking at the girls, you know, in church, and I just couldn't see where on their face you'd put your nose if you're going to kiss them. And it slowed me up considerably. I didn't know that you'd go in like this, you know, or you don't want to mess up the first time out, right? You want to do it right. You don't want to have to try again and again, you know, fencing with the nose. So I've been dating this one girl for a while, and I was getting a lot of razzing from the guys because they'd say, "Yeah, have you kissed her yet?" I'd say, "No, I don't feel like it," you know. But actually, I couldn't engineer it in my mind, it was getting me down a little, but I didn't ever get up my courage. I always would lose my courage at the crucial moment. But I had a friend who had a big nose, and he was by his own admission, he was a real Casanova, you know, a real make-out artist. And one day he was over at the house, and I said, "Bob, you kiss girls a lot, don't you?" He said, "Yeah, I kiss them a lot, you know." I said, "Well, you got a big nose, too." He said, "What are you getting at?" And I said, "Well, you know, when you kiss girls, where, you know, you put your nose." He said, "You know, kiss them with your nose. You kiss them with your lips, not your nose." I said, "Yeah, but, you know, where do you put your nose?" And it was clear he really hadn't ever thought about it, and he was terrible at explaining it. He said, "Well, you know, you don't even think about it. But it was not so." But then we heard my sister out in the kitchen eavesdropping, and he had a marvelous idea. As a punishment for her eavesdropping, she had to come in and sit on the couch. And he did a couple of dry runs for me with the promise we wouldn't either one of us really kiss her, you know, just showing me where you put your nose. And then I sat down with her, and for about 20 minutes, you know, I'd whip around and put my nose in the right place. I got so towards the end I never missed, you know, it was pretty. And so I was all set for Friday night. And the guys gave me the old high sign, "Broderick, you can do it," you know. And I got the back seat all to myself. It was all arranged. It was 9 miles to her house from the dance. And I was to kiss her and report back. And I was tense, but I knew I could do it because I'd been rehearsing it. And you know what happened? She got in on this side. I mean, I never rehearsed it from this side. But you know, you rehearse everything: your emotions, your behavior, you don't want to dance bad the first time, so you practice dancing with your sister or your mother or, you know, or a friend. We used to practice on the fat girls, and then when we got so we weren't humiliated, you know, then we danced with the other girls, and it worked out for everybody. We were pretty good by the time we got to the cute girls, and the fat girls always had somebody to dance with, and it was one of those exchanges that worked out. But by the time you've done all this rehearsing, all this fantasizing, all this practicing, kissing games, you know, they're just an excuse for learning how to kiss before you take any risks with it. You don't have to take a risk on who you ask because there's a bottle or something, you know, that determines it, and you don't have to take a risk on the other person turning you down because they're supposed to be good sports and go along with it. You don't have to take a risk about it getting out of hand because you only get so many kisses or so long, you know. All kissing games is in the world is a chance to learn how to kiss so that when it really is important, you know what to do and how to do it, and you get your style up. Once people learn how to kiss, they don't keep playing kissing games. They go out on a free enterprise basis. And we've discovered that kissing games occur in communities for about 2 years. Now, it's a different 2 years for different communities. It might be the 3rd and 4th grade in one community. It might be the 7th and 8th grade in another community. But there's about 2 years in every community when kissing games come and go. And people get launched into kissing. Now, you see, we have all these mechanisms by which people rehearse the real roles. Now, we found another thing that's interesting. If you get a kid who's had some dating experience and a kid who's had no dating experience, and you have them both tell stories on a projective technique where you show them pictures of a boy and a girl in a very ambiguous situation just sitting by each other. The kid who has never been out with a girl writes a wonderfully happy story. It's a Cinderella story. It ends up wonderfully, and they're happy, they like each other, and they're in love, and so on. Take the kid who's actually been out with a real girl, and he doesn't know what to say, and she didn't know what to say, and he doesn't know. You know, it's an awkward situation. One of the things that was just the opposite from what we expected. We thought that the more experience you'd have, the smoother your stories would be, you know, because you'd have more skill. Just the opposite. The more experience you had, the more hazards you realized there really were for your ego in this negotiation between boys and girls. And yet you're forced into that negotiation, and forced is the right word, I think. Look at what mothers and fathers too, but especially mothers do, to children who don't date. They don't show any interest in the opposite sex. They get nudged, they get pushed, they get little things dropped about them. Sometimes people arrange things for them. My mother there was a couple of girls like that in my town. My mother always used to say, "Why don't you ever take out Janet? She's a lovely girl." You know, I don't like Janet, Mother. I like the girls I'm going out with. But she'd be such a fine date. I know you have a wonderful time, and nobody takes her out all the time. There must be a reason, you know. But mothers have that way of pushing you on. And then once you get together, we have a neat little spiral worked up. It goes something like this. The guy has been trained all of his life to be to see the sexual side of things, to see the sexual potential in things. Not mostly by his parents, obviously, but by his peers. There's a dirty Arthur in every 4th grade who tells the guys all the stories, you know, and sexualizes them. We know that this is true because if you test kids of college age and you show them, say, words of 3 categories very, very fast with a discistoscope, I never can say that, but it shows pictures at 1/10 of a second, see? And they don't have time to think about it. And they wire you up to see what your emotional response is. If your palm sweats, well, they know you got an emotional response. So you show them nice neutral words like home and family and love. Males, females, no needle goes up at all. Now you show them dirty words, nice 4-letter words like you write on the wall. And the needle goes up for everybody. You know, boys, girls, they all, that's exciting. It's shocking, but it goes up. But now show them ambiguous words that have a nice, clean, wholesome meaning and also a sexy, dirty-minded, you know, words like come and lay and screw that, you know, have a wholesome sort of Sunday school definition and also the other definition, you know. 4 times as often the needle goes up on the guys, see. You can't blame that on hormones. That's learned. They learn to see they learn that when they see lay, they don't see a chicken, they see a chick. You know, I'm sorry, that was very bad. You know, that's learning. That's learning. We train boys. So boys have sort of a social obligation to lean in the direction of intimacy. And if you don't, in case you just still think it's just their base animal nature, and I'll grant a certain amount of hormonal support for sex drive in males that gives them something of an advantage in that area. But listen, but test this out, girls. Suppose you went out with a guy for 6-8 weeks, pretty regularly. And during that 6 or 8 weeks, he was unfailingly courteous, kind, reverent, brave, attentive, you know. He was good conversationalist, he was charming, he was witty, he was attentive, but he never touched you. Never put his arm around you, never held your hand, never tried to kiss you. He just was wonderful otherwise. Now, how would you interpret that? As I ask this to classes, the answers that I get are, well, there's probably something wrong with him, Or maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I ought to check to see if there's enough pizzazz in my smile, or my underarm deodorant is working, or gargle with Lavorce or something. There might be something wrong but there's something wrong. Almost nobody admits that. Well, that's okay. So he's expected. Even the most chastely minded and bodied girl likes some opportunity to exercise her chastity, and she never has an opportunity, if nobody ever challenges it. Because her job is pacing him, even if she paces him to practically nothing. You can't pace somebody who's not going anywhere. And she, on the other hand, tends to lean, not so subtly sometimes, toward commitments, emotional commitments. Do you love me? Am I important to you? Am I special to you? What about that other girl? Is she as important to you as I am? And social commitments. Does that other girl know that I'm your girl? Well, why doesn't she know? How about my folks? I've told my folks about you. Have you told your folks about me? A ring or a lavalier or something that is a social declaration of pairness. But as the guy feels he's giving more commitments, he feels it entitles him to push a little harder for more intimacy. But as he pushes harder for more intimacy, the girl reacts by saying, geez, I better cover this level of commitment, a little more commitment here, because, we shouldn't really be doing this unless we're serious. Are we serious? Yeah, we're very serious. Yeah. What a line is? A line is when a male pretends to more sincere commitment than he feels in order to get more sex than he deserves. That's but this thing kind of works in a spiral, so that the guy leans towards sex and the girl responds by leaning towards a need for commitment, and the guy gives a commitment and expects more sex, and this leads the girl to more commitment until finally they arrive at sexual intercourse and at marriage in an order that's determined by the kind of bargaining they have, the kind of do, and the kind of values that they have, and the circumstances that they're in. That's a whole other lecture about the kind of bargaining that couples do around these issues and others. We know a lot about their styles of bargaining. We know about the kinds of bargains that people reach depending on who's one up and who's one down in the relationship, about who's more interested and who's less interested, about what people's self-image is. It's a fascinating thing. We know the circumstances under which guys tend to gross out. That is, they tend to feel that they've been cheated in the bargain, that they were led to believe that they were going to cash in, and now the girl's giving them a runaround, and so they tend to get angry and do gross things. We know a lot about this bargaining between boys and girls, but this, overall, we know that the ultimate bargain, finally, is marriage. Couples who live together in the arrangement eventually either break up or get married. Couples who decide that for them they want to live in a non-conventional commune where everybody has everything in common. Those communes have a half-life of under 2 years, and well under 2 years. 1 year would be closer to the average. And what do people drop out into? Marriage. And so we find that through all these mechanisms, we have in these United States developed pressures and socialization and social mechanisms that lead people to marriage, not as one of my unsophisticated colleagues who teaches a course on marriage says. She compares the courtship as a wedding cake, with a layer of friendship and understanding, and then another layer of insight into personality and matching and comparing values, and another layer, and finally up the top there's the wedding bell and the bride and groom. You see, with that much work, and only 15% make it up to the top, the rest would be nibbling on the frosting on the first layer. You'd never get past that. It's got to be more like a funnel as you just slip down, kicking and screaming if necessary, some happily and some unhappily, but you can't get 95% of the people to do it unless they are enormously many and inventive and successful and effective mechanisms for developing heterosexuality. Well, now what I'm anxious to hear about is the other side of the coin. Thank you.